And again, I was riveted by the Detroit police chief, James Craig, who joined Tucker Carlson last night, because Tucker said to this chief, thank goodness it's not happening in Detroit the way it's happening in Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Baltimore, Portland, Seattle. Why isn't it happening in your city, Chief Craig? Here's what he said.
One thing I learned from my time in Los Angeles, we don't retreat here in Detroit. We're just not going to do it. You saw the images, Tucker, of streets where there was lawlessness, looting, burning, no sight of police officers. We weren't giving up ground to the radicals. We just didn't do it.
You don't hear that kind of language from Democrat leaders, do you? You're not hearing that from the mayor of Seattle or Portland or Minneapolis. You're not hearing this from a lot of Democrat-run cities. It was just, let's listen to part 2 of this. Again, this is the Detroit police chief, James Craig, with Tucker Carlson tonight.
Detroiters are fed up with these radical protests. I'm not talking about the peaceful protesters. I'm talking about that core group. These misguided radicals that have tried to incite violence in our city. They said, we're not going to put up with it. And so we got a couple of things. We got a great police department, great leadership, but we have a community that stands with us and by us and said enough is enough.
That's the police chief of Detroit, Michigan. What do you make of that? What do you make of the failure of these Democrat mayors and the Democratic Party, for that matter, to fail to distinguish between a peaceful protest, an anguished response to George Floyd's death, and the violence and destruction we're seeing, the physical injuries that police officers are incurring? Here's what, and I want to get your, please call me if you think I'm missing the boat here. Because I believe most Americans are fed up, disgusted, angry, and are going to do something about it on November the 3rd. The Democrat Party is not pushing back. You know it and I know it. Here's what Ben Shapiro writes about it. Mostly peaceful. So goes the characterization of the demonstrations that have routinely turned into looting and rioting for months on end in America. One recent ABC News tweet, I told you about this the other day. It was unbelievable. ABC News tweet said, protesters in California set fire to a courthouse, damaged a police station, and assaulted officers after a peaceful demonstration intensified. That was an actual tweet. That was actually said by ABC News. CNN called protests in Portland mostly peaceful, adding that they have at times devolved into violence, vandalism, and arson. Arson! During riots in Los Angeles last month, as the country locked down, the Los Angeles Times said, quote, the third night of countrywide curfews followed days of massive, mostly peaceful protests. Nearly 1,200 people were arrested Sunday after police officers clashed with demonstrators and looters, shattered windows, and emptied stores in Santa Monica and Long Beach. Ben Shapiro writes, in truth, the category of mostly peaceful is a brand new invention meant to obscure the simple fact that many of our cultural elites are fine with violence so long as those who engage in such violence have the proper goals. This week, as you saw yesterday, and as you probably heard, the Democrats grilled Attorney General Barr, and they couldn't be bothered to condemn the violence, prompting Barr to say, what makes me concerned for the country is that this is the first time in my memory the leaders of one of our great two political parties, the Democratic Party, are not coming out and condemning mob violence and the attack on federal courts. Ben says this should come as little surprise, given that those same cultural elites have cheered on massive protests in a time of a deadly pandemic, explaining that sometimes politics is just too important to stop a raging disease. Ben Shapiro says our journey back to the 1960s is nearly complete. Too many Americans have rejected some of the key lessons of that time, that a breakdown in law and order costs lives, that political change does not require violence in favor of a newfound sense of purpose. These Americans will pat the violent vanguard of revolution on the head. He says, listen, with each passing day of silence by those who should know better, or worse, those propagandizing on behalf of those who engage in criminal activity, America draws closer to the brink